The dream of flight. The sun hung high over Jose's sprawling farmland, its golden rays kissing the fertile soil that had been his life's work. He stood at the edge of his fields, watching as the wind wove through the rows of corn, carrying with it the dreams he had nurtured since he was a boy. The idea of flying had always fascinated Jose, a simple man with calloused hands and a heart full of ambition. Owning a private jet seemed like an impossible dream for someone like him, a farmer who spent his days tilling the land and ensuring his crops thrived. But he had worked tirelessly, saved every penny, and built his legacy brick by brick. The day had finally come. Dressed in his usual attire, worn jeans, a plaid shirt, and his trusty straw hat, Jose made his way to the airport with a determination that burned brighter than the midday sun. He wasn't looking to impress anyone. He was there to fulfill a dream. His boots, caked with dirt from his fields, carried him confidently into the sleek, polished showroom of the private jet dealership. Inside, the atmosphere was starkly different from the familiar warmth of his farm. The room exuded opulence. Marble floors gleamed under chandeliers, and customers dressed in designer suits and elegant dresses moved about, exuding wealth and sophistication. Jose felt a few stares but brushed them off. He was here for a purpose, a rude awakening. A salesman approached, his tailored suit pristine and his smile thin. "Good afternoon," he said, his tone laced with skepticism. "May I help you?" "Yes," Jose replied, his voice steady. "I'm here to look at jets. I'm interested in buying one." The salesman's eyebrows shot up, a flicker of disbelief crossing his face. He scanned Jose from head to toe, his expression betraying his thoughts. "Ah, well, our jets are quite expensive. Perhaps you'd like to see our promotional material first." Jose felt the weight of the man's judgment, but chose to ignore it. "No, thank you. I'd like to see the planes." Reluctantly, the salesman led Jose to the hangar, his condescending demeanor growing more apparent with each step. He rattled off technical specifications and prices with little enthusiasm, pausing occasionally to glance at Jose, as if waiting for him to falter or admit he was out of his depth. Despite the cold reception, Jose listened intently, his curiosity genuine. "Are you sure you're serious about this?" the salesman finally asked, unable to hide his impatience. "These jets are multi-million-dollar investments." Jose met his gaze squarely. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." The salesman smirked but said nothing. As they continued the tour, whispers and stares from other customers grew louder. Comments like, "He doesn't look like he belongs here," and "Is he lost?" reached Jose's ears. Though their words stung, he held his head high, refusing to let their judgment deter him. An unexpected encounter. As Jose inspected the interior of a sleek jet, a familiar voice called out from behind him. "Jose, is that you?" Startled, Jose turned to see an old friend, Marco, approaching with a wide grin. Marco, once a fellow farmer, had moved to the city years ago and built a successful business. Despite the passage of time, his jovial demeanor remained unchanged. "Marco," Jose exclaimed, relief washing over him like a cool breeze. The two embraced, their laughter cutting through the tension in the room. "What are you doing here?" Marco asked, his eyes twinkling with curiosity. Jose hesitated but decided to be honest. "I'm here to buy a jet. It's something I've dreamed about for years." Marco's expression shifted to one of admiration. "Well, I'll be damned. Good for you, Jose." Their conversation brought Jose a sense of comfort, but the mocking whispers persisted. Some customers began taking photos, their intentions clear. Marco noticed and frowned. "Don't mind them, Jose. They're just insecure people trying to make themselves feel better." Jose nodded, though the weight of the stares and laughter pressed heavily on him. He began to doubt himself. Was this dream worth the humiliation? As they turned to leave, a voice called out, loud and mocking. "Hey, farmer, do you think anyone here believes you can afford a jet? Go back to your field where you belong." The room fell silent as all eyes turned to Jose. His heart raced, anger and embarrassment swirling within him. He clenched his fists, unsure of how to respond. But then something shifted. A spark of determination flared, pushing him to stand tall. Rising above, "I'm here to buy a plane," Joe said firmly, his voice cutting through the silence. "Not to impress anyone, but because it's my dream." Laughter erupted from the group, but Jose refused to back down. "You can mock me all you want," he continued, his tone unwavering. "But I've worked hard for this. My clothes may be dirty, but my money is clean, earned through years of sweat and dedication." The room grew quieter as his words sank in. Jose reached into his pocket and pulled out a check, its amount matching the jet's price. He held it up for all to see. "This is proof that dreams can become reality, no matter where you come from or what you wear." The mocking expressions turned to shock, embarrassment creeping across the faces of those who had judged him. Even the salesman, who had dismissed Jose earlier, looked stunned. Marco clapped a hand on Jose's shoulder. "Well said, my friend. Don't let anyone dim your light." Before leaving, Jose turned to the salesman. "I'll take the jet. I expect better treatment next time." Part 5. The lesson. As Jose drove home, he reflected on the day's events. The experience had been painful, but it had also been empowering. He realized that the opinions of others didn't define him. His actions and character did. By staying true to himself, he had proven that dreams were worth pursuing, no matter the obstacles. The following week, Jose received his jet, a symbol not just of his success, but of his resilience. He shared the story with his family and community, inspiring them to chase their dreams fearlessly. "Never let anyone tell you what you can or cannot do," Jose told his son one evening as they stood on their farm, watching the sunset. "Your dreams are as big as you make them. And remember, it's not what you wear that matters, it's what's in your heart." The weight of judgment. Jose walked into the hangar, where gleaming jets stood like silent giants. The polished floors reflected their grandeur, and every surface sparkled with the sheen of luxury. It was a stark contrast to the world Jose knew, a world of mud-streaked boots, weather-worn barns, and the earthy scent of freshly tilled soil. He marveled at the planes, his heart swelling with a mix of awe and determination. The salesman led him to one of the smaller jets, pointing out features with a disinterested wave of his hand. "This is one of our entry-level models," he said, his voice betraying the faintest hint of condescension. "Perhaps this is more within your range." Jose nodded thoughtfully, his calloused fingers grazing the sleek surface of the jet's fuselage. "What's the range on this one?" he asked, his voice steady despite the unease growing in his chest. 2,000 nautical miles, the salesman replied curtly. "It's a good choice for someone starting out." "Starting out," Jose repeated, raising an eyebrow. The words felt loaded, but he chose not to react. Instead, he continued examining the jet, his interest genuine. As they moved to another plane, the tension between them grew palpable. The salesman's patience seemed to wear thin with every question Jose asked. He sighed audibly when Jose inquired about fuel efficiency and maintenance costs, as though such details were irrelevant to someone like him. Meanwhile, whispers rippled through the showroom. A group of well-dressed customers stood near the entrance, casting sideways glances at Jose. Their laughter was quiet but pointed, the kind that carried the sting of ridicule. "Who let him in here?" one of them murmured. "Maybe he's lost," another said, smirking. The comments pricked at Jose's composure, but he forced himself to remain focused. He wasn't here for their approval. Still, the growing chorus of judgment began to weigh on him. It was as if the air in the room had turned hostile, each glance and whisper a reminder that he didn't belong. An impatient interruption. The salesman, too, seemed to be affected by the murmurs. His tone grew sharper, his movements brusque. "Well, if you're not serious about buying, I have other clients to attend to," he said, crossing his arms. Jose stopped in his tracks, startled by the blatant disrespect. He turned to face the salesman, his eyes narrowing. "I am serious," he said firmly. "I wouldn't waste your time otherwise." The salesman hesitated, caught off guard by Jose's directness. But before he could respond, a voice from the group of onlookers rang out, louder this time. "He doesn't look like someone who can afford this. Probably just here to take pictures." Laughter followed, harsh and mocking. The sound of it echoed in the cavernous hangar, each chuckle chipping away at Jose's resolve. He felt their eyes on him, dissecting his every move, his every word. He tried to focus on the jet in front of him, but the weight of their judgment was impossible to ignore. As if to confirm their disdain, one of the men took out his phone and pointed it at Jose. "Smile for the camera," he jeered, the flash briefly illuminating the room. Jose's face burned with humiliation, but he refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing him falter. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms, and took a deep breath. "I'm here to buy a jet," he said quietly to himself, repeating the words like a mantra. "Not to impress anyone." A familiar face. Just as Jose was about to step away, a hand clapped him on the shoulder. He turned, startled, to find a man grinning at him, a face from the past. Marco, his childhood friend, stood there, his striped shirt and slightly out-of-shape belly, a welcome contrast to the polished crowd around them. "Jose," Marco exclaimed, his voice warm and hearty. "What are you doing here?" For the first time that day, Jose felt a flicker of relief. He returned Marco's grin, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "I could ask you the same thing." Marco laughed. "Business, of course. But you? Are you here to buy a plane?" Jose hesitated, glancing around the room at the people still watching him. "I was thinking about it," he admitted. "But I don't think I fit in here." Marco frowned, following Jose's gaze. "Don't mind these rich snobs," he said, his voice loud enough for a few of the onlookers to hear. "They wouldn't know hard work if it slapped them in the face." The two men laughed, though the sound was tinged with unease. Jose appreciated Marco's attempt to lighten the mood, but the constant stares and whispers made it hard to relax. He felt like an outsider, an intruder in a world that wasn't meant for him. "Come on," Marco said, nudging him gently. "Let's get out of here. You don't need to waste your time with people like this." Jose nodded, the idea of leaving tempting. But as they turned toward the exit, a voice called out behind them, louder and more cutting than before. "Hey, farmer," one of the men shouted, his tone dripping with derision. "Do you really think anyone here takes you seriously? Look at you, dirty boots, a hat that's seen better days. You should stick to your crops and leave the jets to us." The words stopped Jose in his tracks. He turned slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. The room fell silent, all eyes on him. For a moment, he considered walking away, letting the ridicule roll off his back. But then he thought of all the years he had spent building his dream, of the sacrifices he had made to stand where he was now. He straightened his spine, his chin lifting defiantly. "I'm here for myself," he said, his voice strong and steady, "not to prove anything to you." Laughter erupted again, louder this time, but Jose held his ground. Something inside him refused to let the moment pass without making a statement, not for the people mocking him, but for himself. He wasn't just a farmer. He was a dreamer, a doer, and someone who believed in the power of perseverance. And no amount of laughter could take that away. The power of perseverance. The laughter echoed through the hangar like a storm, filling every corner with a mocking energy that sought to drown Jose's resolve. For a fleeting moment, he felt the weight of their scorn threatening to crush him. But as their laughter rang in his ears, he reminded himself of the years he had spent rising before dawn, working through blistering summers, and braving countless setbacks. The soil beneath his nails, the sunburns on his neck, those were badges of honor. He had faced harder battles than this. Jose took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling as he steadied himself. The condescending voice of the man who had insulted him still lingered in the air, but instead of shrinking, Joe stepped forward, his boots thudding purposefully against the polished floor. "I've built my life from the ground up," Joe's began, his voice carrying an unmistakable edge of pride and defiance. The room grew quieter as he spoke, the smug expressions around him giving way to curiosity. "I've spent years working harder than most of you could imagine. The clothes I wear, the dirt on my boots, those are signs of where I come from. They're not something I'm ashamed of. They're something I'm proud of." The group of onlookers exchanged glances, their confidence faltering. Even the salesman, who had dismissed Jose earlier, shifted uncomfortably, his polished demeanor cracking under the weight of the farmer's unyielding gaze. "You laugh because I don't look like you," Joe's continued, his tone unwavering. "Because I don't wear a suit or drive a fancy car. But let me tell you something. Success isn't about what you wear or how you look. It's about what you're willing to work for." He reached into his pocket, his hand closing around the folded check he had brought with him. Unfolding it slowly, he held it up for all to see. "This check represents years of sacrifice, dedication, and determination. It's more than just a piece of paper. It's proof that dreams can be achieved, no matter where you come from." The room fell silent. The laughter, once so loud and unrelenting, had vanished, replaced by an uneasy stillness. Jose scanned the faces around him, noting the flickers of shame and discomfort that had begun to surface. An unexpected intervention. Just as the tension reached its peak, a voice broke the silence. "That's enough," it said firmly. Everyone turned to see an older man stepping forward, his silver hair gleaming under the hangar lights. He was impeccably dressed, his presence commanding respect. The murmurs in the room ceased instantly. The man approached Jose, his expression one of quiet respect. "I couldn't help but overhear," he said. "And I have to say, you've impressed me." Jose tilted his head, unsure of how to respond. The older man extended a hand. "My name is Richard Gaines. I own this dealership." The name sent a ripple of recognition through the room. Richard Gaines was a legend in the aviation world, known not just for his business acumen, but for his fair and ethical treatment of clients. "I've seen many people walk through these doors," Richard continued, his gaze steady. "Some with wealth beyond measure, others with nothing but a dream. And let me tell you, it's the dreamers who inspire me most." Jose shook Richard's hand, his grip firm. "Thank you," he said, his voice carrying the faintest trace of emotion. "That means a lot." Richard turned to the salesman, his expression hardening. "As for you," he said sharply, "I expect my employees to treat every client with respect, regardless of their background. Consider this your first and final warning." The salesman's face turned pale. He stammered an apology, but Richard waved him off, his attention returning to Jose. "Now let's finish what you came here for," he said with a smile. "Shall we?" The moment of truth. Richard led Jose to a different section of the hangar, where a larger, more advanced jet awaited. "I think this might be more in line with what you're looking for," he said. "It's reliable, efficient, and built for someone who values practicality and performance." Jose examined the jet, his excitement bubbling just beneath the surface. He asked questions, this time met with thoughtful and respectful answers. Richard treated him as an equal, engaging in a genuine conversation about the jet's capabilities and how it could meet Jose's needs. As they finalized the paperwork, Richard glanced at Jose and said, "You know, I've met a lot of people who buy jets to flaunt their wealth. But you're different. You're buying this for a purpose, not for show. And that's something I admire." Jose nodded, his gratitude evident. "I'm buying it because it's a dream I've had for a long time," he said, "and because I want to show my family and my community that anything is possible if you're willing to work for it." When the transaction was complete, Jose stood in front of the jet, the keys in his hand. The group of onlookers who had mocked him earlier were nowhere to be seen, their confidence shattered by the turn of events. Jose didn't care. This moment wasn't about them. It was about him and the journey that had brought him here. A lesson for all. As Jose prepared to leave the dealership, Richard walked him to the exit. "One last thing," Richard said. "Never let anyone tell you what you're worth. You define your value, not them." Jose smiled, tipping his hat. "Thank you, Mr. Gaines. I won't forget that." As he drove back to his farm, the jet waiting to be delivered, Jose felt a profound sense of fulfillment. He had faced judgment, ridicule, and doubt, but he had stood his ground and proved that dreams were worth fighting for. He knew the journey hadn't just been about buying a plane. It had been about affirming his belief in himself and inspiring others to do the same. From that day forward, the jet became more than just a tool for travel. It became a symbol of perseverance, a testament to the power of hard work and resilience. And every time Jose looked at it, he was reminded that the only limits in life were the ones we placed on ourselves. A symbol of dreams. The drive back to the farm was long, but Jose didn't mind. His heart was full, his thoughts racing as he processed the events of the day. The sting of judgment and ridicule had been sharp, but the sweetness of triumph was sharper. As the rolling fields came into view, the golden hues of the setting sun blanketed his land, reminding him of everything he had built, everything he stood for. His wife, Maria, was waiting on the porch when he arrived. Her apron was dusted with flour, and her face lit up with a mixture of relief and curiosity as he stepped out of the truck. "Well," she asked, wiping her hands on the apron, "did you get what you went for?" Jose's lips curved into a proud smile as he pulled the paperwork and a set of keys from his pocket. "It's done," he said simply. "We're going to have our own plane." Maria's eyes widened, her hands flying to her mouth in disbelief. "You actually did it." "I did," Jose replied, his voice steady. "And not just for me, for us, for the family, for the future." Maria embraced him tightly, her warmth grounding him after a day of high emotions. She pulled back slightly, studying his face. "It wasn't easy, was it?" Jose shook his head. "No, it wasn't. People judged me before I even had a chance to prove myself, but I didn't let them stop me. I couldn't." Maria's expression softened. "That's why I've always believed in you," she said. "You don't back down when it matters." As the two stood there, bathed in the golden light of the sunset, Jose felt a deep sense of gratitude. For his family, for his resilience, and for the journey that had brought him to this moment. A community transformed. Word of Jose's purchase spread quickly through the small town. At first, the news was met with disbelief. "Jose? The farmer? A jet?" people asked, their voices tinged with skepticism. But as the days passed and the jet arrived, gleaming in its metallic splendor, the disbelief gave way to astonishment. The sight of the plane parked on the edge of Jose's farmland drew neighbors from miles around. Children marveled at its size, their eyes wide with wonder, while adults exchanged murmurs of awe. For many, it was the first time they had seen a private jet up close. For others, it was a symbol, a reminder that dreams, no matter how lofty, could be achieved with hard work and determination. Jose welcomed the visitors with open arms, inviting them to see the plane up close and hear the story behind it. He spoke not of the judgment he had faced, but of the perseverance that had carried him through. "This isn't just my jet," he told them one evening as a crowd gathered around the aircraft. "It's a reminder that we're not limited by where we come from or what people think of us. If you believe in your dreams and work hard for them, anything is possible." His words struck a chord with the community. People who had once dismissed their own dreams began to revisit them. Farmers talked about expanding their operations, local artisans explored selling their goods beyond the town, and students spoke of pursuing careers they had once considered out of reach. A son's pride. Jose's son, Mateo, arrived from the city a week later. His sharp suit and polished demeanor, a stark contrast to his father's rugged attire. But their bond was evident in the way Mateo embraced Jose, his pride shining through. "I heard about what happened at the dealership," Matteo said as they walked together across the fields. "You could have walked away, but you didn't. That takes courage." Jose shrugged, his expression thoughtful. "I didn't do it to prove anything to them," he said. "I did it to prove something to myself, and to you, to your mother, to everyone who's ever doubted what's possible." Matteo nodded, a newfound respect for his father evident in his eyes. "You've taught me more than any classroom ever could," he said. "I'll never forget that." Together, they stood in silence, the plane gleaming in the distance. It was more than a machine. It was a testament to the values Jose had lived by: hard work, humility, and the courage to dream. The day of the first flight. The day of the first flight was one of celebration. Friends, family, and neighbors gathered on the farm, their excitement palpable as they watched the final preparations. Jose had hired a local pilot to train him, but today, the pilot would take the controls while Jose sat in the passenger seat, ready to experience his dream in full. As the engine roared to life, the crowd erupted in cheers. Jose looked out the window, his heart pounding with anticipation. The plane began to roll forward, the ground beneath it blurring as it picked up speed. And then, with a rush of wind and a surge of power, they were airborne. The world below unfolded in breathtaking detail: the patchwork of fields, the winding roads, and the tiny figures of his loved ones waving up at him. Jose's eyes welled with tears as he realized the enormity of what he had accomplished. This wasn't just a flight. It was a moment that symbolized everything he had worked for, a moment that would inspire generations to come, a legacy to remember. In the weeks and months that followed, Jose's story spread far beyond the borders of his town. Articles were written, interviews were conducted, and people from all walks of life found inspiration in the tale of the farmer who had defied expectations. But for Jose, the greatest reward wasn't the recognition. It was the knowledge that he had stayed true to himself. He continued to work his land, his boots still caked with dirt and his hands still calloused from labor. The jet became a tool to connect with the world beyond the farm, but it never replaced the simple joys of the life he loved. One evening, as he sat on the porch with Maria, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he said, "You know, the jet is just a thing. What really matters is the message, that no one has the right to tell you what you can or can't do." Maria smiled, taking his hand in hers. "And you've shown the world that, Jose." And so, the farmer who had dared to dream left behind a legacy not of wealth, but of courage, perseverance, and the unwavering belief that even the most improbable dreams could take flight, a flight beyond the horizon. Months passed, and Jose's life changed in subtle but profound ways. The jet parked on his farmland became a beacon, drawing visitors from far and wide. It wasn't just a symbol of wealth or success. It was a testament to the power of hard work and determination, a story people wanted to hear firsthand. Jose's quiet world of crops and cattle had transformed into a hub of inspiration. Yet, despite the attention, he remained the same, humble, grounded, and deeply connected to his roots. One day, a letter arrived in the mail, embossed with the emblem of a prestigious university. Matteo, now back in the city practicing law, had secretly shared his father's story with the school, and they had invited Jose to speak at an upcoming event. The theme: defying expectations. Jose was stunned. The thought of speaking in front of strangers filled him with apprehension, but Matteo encouraged him. "You've already taught me so much, Dad," he said. "Imagine how many more people you can inspire." The farmer takes the stage. When the day of the event arrived, Jose found himself in an auditorium far grander than anything he had ever seen. The stage was flanked by towering curtains, and rows of seats stretched endlessly, filled with students, professors, and dignitaries. Jose stood backstage, adjusting the same well-worn hat he had worn to the jet dealership. Matteo, standing beside him, gave his father an encouraging nod. "You've got this," Matteo said. Taking a deep breath, Jose stepped onto the stage. The bright lights momentarily blinded him, But as he scanned the audience, he saw faces filled with curiosity. These were not the mocking stares of the dealership, but the eager gazes of people who wanted to learn. He began to speak, his voice steady despite his nerves. "Good evening," he said, his accent thick, but his words clear. "My name is Jose, and I'm a farmer." The room was silent, hanging on his every word. "I didn't grow up with much," Jose continued, "but I had dreams, dreams that felt too big for someone like me. Dreams that people laughed at or dismissed because of where I came from or how I looked." He paused, looking down at his hands. "These hands," he said, holding them up, "have planted thousands of seeds, mended fences, and built a life. But what they've really done is prove that with enough work, you can build anything, even a dream." Jose shared his story, recounting the ridicule he faced at the dealership and how he had stood his ground. He spoke of his family, his farm, and the values that had shaped him: perseverance, humility, and the courage to dream. By the time he finished, the room erupted in applause. Many stood, clapping with tears in their eyes. Jose had expected polite acknowledgement. But this was a moment he would never forget. A ripple effect. Jose's speech became a catalyst for change. Students wrote to him, sharing how his words had inspired them to chase their own dreams. Farmers from across the country reached out, seeing themselves in his story. Even the dealership that had once dismissed him sent an apologetic letter, acknowledging their mistake and expressing admiration for his journey. But Jose wasn't interested in fame. What mattered to him was the impact his story had on others. He began speaking at schools and community events, always wearing his hat and boots as a reminder of his roots. Each time, his message was the same: don't let anyone else define your worth. Your dreams are yours to chase. The first community flight. One summer afternoon, Jose decided to do something special. He invited the children from the local school to the farm for what he called the Flight of Dreams. Parents, teachers, and community members gathered, watching with excitement as Jose prepared the jet. With the help of his pilot, Jose organized short flights for groups of children, giving them their first taste of the sky. As the plane soared above the fields, their laughter and cheers filled the cabin. For many, it was a transformative experience, proof that the impossible could become possible. At the end of the day, one little girl tugged at Jose's sleeve. "Do you think I could fly planes one day?" she asked, her eyes wide with wonder. Jose knelt to her level, his face breaking into a warm smile. "If that's your dream, then yes," he said. "But remember, it's not just about flying. It's about working hard and believing in yourself, no matter what anyone says." Legacy of a dreamer. Years later, Jose's story continued to inspire. His farm remained his sanctuary, but his influence stretched far beyond its boundaries. The jet, once a symbol of his personal triumph, had become a tool for uplifting others. Jose used it to connect with communities, deliver aid, and support causes that aligned with his values. One evening, as Jose and Maria sat on the porch, watching their grandchildren play, Mateo joined them, holding a leather-bound book. "Dad, I've been working on something," he said, handing it to Jose. Jose opened the book, his eyes widening as he realized what it was: a collection of stories and letters from people whose lives he had touched. From students to farmers to professionals, each page was filled with words of gratitude and admiration. "This is your legacy," Mateo said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not the jet or the speeches, but the lives you've changed." Jose closed the book, his hands trembling slightly. He looked out at the horizon, where the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "I never set out to build a legacy," he said softly. "I just wanted to chase my dream. The rest, that's a blessing." The final takeoff. In the years that followed, Jose continued to live a life of purpose and humility. When the time came for him to step away from the jet and pass it on to a community organization, he did so with pride, knowing it would continue to inspire. And as Hosey watched the plane take off for its first flight under new ownership, he felt no sadness, only joy. For he knew that his dream had taken on a life of its own, soaring beyond the limits of his imagination and into the hearts of countless others. As the jet disappeared into the horizon, Hose turned back to his farm, his heart full, because in the end, it wasn't the plane or the applause that mattered. It was the lesson he had learned and shared, that dreams, no matter how unlikely, are always worth the fight. And sometimes, those dreams don't just take flight, they lift others with them. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.